I'm Tanya Fox, and you're listening to Fox Talks Business Podcast. I started my career in the corporate world, but always played to my own tune and loved to think outside of the box. This didn't always serve me well with the bosses, so I made the decision to become an entrepreneur. And that little seed of entrepreneurial curiosity continued to grow as I branched out into retail, service, and franchise businesses. Now, I have been fortunate to have amazing successes in the last 2 decades, but they did not come without some really big failures and even bigger lessons learned. And that's why I started this podcast, not just to share the failures, but to show you how you can turn every failure into a success. We're going to hear from some amazing humans from around the world that are going to share their stories of the good, the bad, and the motivational entrepreneurial life has to offer. After all, life is too short to make all of the mistakes yourself, so why not learn from each other? And of course, we're going to have some fun, because as I always say, well, you know what? I'll tell you that at the end of the episode. Hello, Foxy listeners. Welcome to the show today. I have a great guest, Colin, with me, but I'm going to do something a little bit different with him because usually I welcome people to the show and I get them to tell us a little bit about themselves. But I really feel like in the first question that I'm going to ask you, your story is going to come out anyway, because we're going to be talking a little bit about finance and numbers, which I know a lot of people are like ready to hit like fast forward. But this is different because it's not coming from an accountant. So talk to us a little bit about how you decided that numbers and paying attention to numbers was important for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on first. And, full disclosure. So I would call myself a bit of a numbers nerd as life has gone on, but I did not do super well in school. I was not taking all the advanced, math classes or anything like that. It really, to me, was when I got in business, and I can tell that story. But as I got in business, the numbers just resonated to me. It was kind of how the business measured itself. It made very kind of basic logical sense to me, and so I gravitated to that part of the business, which at the time was a huge need for us, and it just clicked, and that became really my career.
So talk to us a little bit about the first business that you have, because I do want you to dive into that story a little bit.
Yeah. So the first business was a family business. So I decided I'll spare you the whole details, but I decided to be an entrepreneur and looked around my life and realized the person closest to me was a family member who had a business. And I thought, I'll go do this for a year and then I'll move on and do my own thing. And, 22 years later, I still own that business. Which is just
it's hard to get rid of the first one, right?
And it's just kind of how life does. But yeah, so I went to that business and it was really just, get a generic job. It wasn't even a accounting or finance job. And then within a year or so, the business was really struggling. And so, I was asked, because I was trusted, hey, can you dive in and help figure this out? And I had no background, no training. It was very typical small business, just like dive in there and figure it out.
We can't, so you try.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I did. And really it was kind of an interesting story. The very first employee of the company, I found within a couple months that the very first employee of the company had been embezzling from the company. And so that was the first person I ever fired, which was interesting. And so it led me to do a deep dive. I mean, I was pulling boxes out of our attic space and just going through, back to the beginning of every credit card and bank statement, and just from the grassroots ground up, learning the business through the numbers. And as I started to figure out what was working and not working from a profitability standpoint, I never really let go of that just, obsession with kind of how the numbers impact the business.
Right. And so since then, so when you sort of had that first business, what made you kind of want to branch off into something else?
So I had a mentor who was kind of, like a frenemy, but a mentor. It's kind of a complex relationship, but someone who I saw who was much further along in their career than I was when I was very young. I started, the story kind of begins me going to the business when I was 21, just turning 22 years old. And so I saw then that here was a guy who owned multiple businesses, but didn't work at any of them. And that was a really unusual thing. It still is pretty unusual, but especially, 20 years ago, I feel like it was even more unusual, this notion that someone could do that in a small business setting. And so when I saw that, and I didn't have a passion for the product of the business that I started in, which was it's airport conveyors. It's not exactly something that like gets me jazzed.
It's not, yeah.
It's
It's
believe it or
not
not,
something you're like, hey, do you need a conveyor?
exactly. And so, but I saw this kind of template. And so here was someone who, even though I had a challenging relationship with, I saw this template for a way you could, really construct your world where you're not necessarily in these businesses, but working on multiple. And so from that early stage, long before I had dealt with the turnaround of the first business or gotten to the point where we could even get our head above water, much less actually reinvest, I already had this, dream of like, hey, I'm going to use this as a point to branch out into other things.
And so talk to us a little bit about, because now in sort of your current business, you're starting to, are you starting to see the change, or like, is that your goal, is for people to start seeing the change in why they need to pay attention to the numbers? Because I think this is something that people go into business with, right? The idea is important.
Yep.
Being excited about it is important. Like you said, actually being motivated to do this stuff. But the numbers are kind of always, and I know this because I was an accountant, it's the last thing, right? It's
Yeah.
shoved into the shoebox and then handed to somebody to go, here, you figured this out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so to your point, what we, really, I guess the whole story was once I had multiple businesses, I had CEOs who ran those businesses, and it gave me the opportunity to really kind of fulfill this finance seat within the businesses. And so, but I kept running into the same problem, which everyone does, which is doing bookkeeping doesn't really add value. Like at best, you got the month closed 2 days earlier. Awesome.
Yeah.
At best, the credit card ties back and the bank statement balances and high five. Nobody cares because it doesn't actually add value. It's a fundamental, incredibly significant part of business. But to your point, no one's getting excited about it. No one's going into business going, I just start my own business so I can do the numbers. Nobody's thinking that, including me. And so as I kind of came to that realization, and this was always a major, source of kind of, I guess, where I saw the business differently than most people. And then, a big eye opener to me was when the whole PPP thing happened. COVID was going really strong. Everyone is freaking out. All my fellow business owners who I have been connecting with over the years were, partially looking to me to say, like, how do you make heads or tails of this as more of a financial business owner? And so really helping them through that process, it just further enlightened me to, how big of a need there is, because people have, hopefully as a business owner, you have other friends and people around you who you trust, but are they people who actually understand the financial side of your business, or just another fellow business owner passionate about their product?
And I think that's something that people fall into all the time. Cause like you said, I don't think like numbers or bookkeeping has ever been something that's been romanced. And also, I have found, like, in my career of doing, accounting and then downgrading to kind of bookkeeping, I always found the thing that was always lacking is, here you have somebody who stares at the numbers and tells you nothing about what they're doing or how to fix them. Like, this number isn't really working for you. You need to change this. It's literally like almost like a robotic sort of situation. Enter it in, it spits it out. This is what your end number is, as opposed to looking at it going, what story is this number trying to tell me?
Yeah, I love that. That's a really insightful, and I would argue that cuts both ways. So the recipient of those numbers, the business owner, let's say, they're not getting any of that insight. They're just getting, at best, this person's robotically doing the same job they did last month over again. At worst, there's issues that I don't understand. I don't know how to oversee this role because I have no clue how to actually do it. And then it's also really disengaging for the bookkeeper, right? As well as the tax preparer, whoever else is touching the books, because it's the administrative task kind of eats you up over time. You're just always treading water, right? I mean, it's kind of like delivering the mail or something. It's like every day we got more mail coming. And so as we had looked at that was one of my big concerns. Was I would always see, we would get a bookkeeper in, we'd get them trained, we'd get them, and I've fulfilled that role myself. And so you get to this point where it's like, okay, I'm doing the basics. And now you start looking around for another part of the business where you can add value. If you can ever get ahead It's almost like, well, let me get that and set that over here so I can get back to something that's actually important. And I think that's a real shame, because there's a huge opportunity for business owners to really get insights from their numbers and better understand, like you said, the story behind them, which is exactly what we're trying to do.
So, in what ways do you think a business owner, because of course, like I can, I can feel people's eyes glazing over, because this is a topic that I think it's just one of those topics that it's not beautiful and fancy. Like it's never
Yeah.
wrapped up really nicely.
Yep.
But what are some of the ways you found that have worked to sort of help motivate those people to, besides us just kind of saying this is important because they hear it, right? I think
Yeah.
you hear that all of the time and you're like, yeah, next
Yep.
month,
No. To
100%
your,
on my
yeah,
schedule.
exactly. Yeah. I'm totally gonna get around to that. Just give me a little more time. No, to your point, I think the significance is not lost on anyone. It's really the disconnect between like, okay, I know this is important. Now what? And so what we did, and I can kind of give you our 3-step process, but the middle step is I think the one that's relevant here, which is we created what we call as the Fin score. And the Fin score is just it's a diagnostic tool. It's a scorecard. It's 20 different elements across the business that explains where you are. And, we're each one of the 20 areas, it's a 1 through 5 score. And so for a business owner, what I've found is you put a P&L in front of somebody, you put a balance sheet, they just get overwhelmed. There's like the little numbers, the big numbers, how do they interrelate? You start getting lost and kind of overwhelmed in it. And so what I love about this is I'm happy to go deeper with the numbers. We're happy to pull out the P&L and show you how this is happening there. But it's a scorecard. Everybody knows out of 100, right? It's 20 different levers, we call them, 1 through 5 score for each. Maximum score is 100. And so
Right.
if your Fin score is 72 and last month it was 68, we've gotten better. And so we've kind of, but without let's say convoluting it to the point where I'm not really giving them real financial data, I've simplified it down to a scoring system that everyone's comfortable with. And then hopefully when they get comfortable, that helps tip off like, wait a minute, we're falling behind here. Let's go dive in and figure out what's going on. Or, hey, we've really grown. What's happening?
Well, and I like this because I think it's a more simplistic approach. Because I know, like, if anybody's seen like a profit and loss comparison and it has the percentage numbers that like any accounting program will spit out, I always laugh when people are like, look, I'm doing so good. And I'm like, no, hang on a second. Because if we really dive into that, last month you spent $2,000 on this, whatever, let's say like advertising. And this month it's only been $2 because there was just a little bit left over on that invoice. So that's why it says that you're doing like a 200% better. Like
Yep,
it's
exactly.
not actually true, right? And it's
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard to read that properly and fully understand exactly what those percentages mean. Or like you said, people just go right to the very bottom and go, I'm not in the hole.
Yep.
It's not a negative. It's a win.
Exactly. And I, most business owners, especially newer business owners, but even really experienced ones, they kind of, I find that they retreat from the financial statements and just say, I either have money in the bank or I don't. I
Yeah.
either feel good about the money in the bank or I feel nervous about the money in the bank. And that's like their one piece of gut check. But, the reality is obviously it's more complicated. And I don't think everyone needs to become, get an MBA or become a CPA or do something to become a financial expert, but you owe it to yourself. I mean, this is like saying, I'm going to be in business, but I don't want to sell. It's like, well, okay, then what are you actually doing? Right. I mean, you have to be good at your product, you have to sell, and you have to understand your numbers, or you're never going to get where you want to go.
Well, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show, because I think that, it's such a key element in business and one that's often, kind of left behind because, again, it's not fancy, it's not shiny, but it's true that in those moments, it's very hard to decide where you want to go with your business or how you want to change it if you don't know if it's even possible. And I found time and time again that this is where people get in trouble, right? Because they're like, hey, we're going to try this like brand new thing and they have no numbers behind
Yep.
it. And then
Yep.
they're like, the whole business is like, now everything is sinking and we don't know
Yeah.
what to do. Now, for me, it works out well because then that's when they come to my company and they're like, help. But it's
Yeah.
very expensive to get you to stop drowning, where most of the time I'm like, if you just would have called me beforehand, we could have just sent you a boat over instead
Yeah.
of you jumping into the
Absolutely.
water going, somebody save me eventually.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah,
So,
that's a really good point.
so for you, like, so you already kind of were doing this finance background. Like you had said, you had done it a couple of times. What made you decide to go back to school to really get more onto this? Was that just because it was what you were doing, or?
Yeah, so it was really in my first company. We were still in the middle of a turnaround, and really within a month of each other, I took over the business as CEO that I first started at, and
Okay.
went to business and started my executive MBA program. And that was kind of an interesting story in its own right. I actually never graduated with a bachelor's degree. But I pestered a nationally ranked executive MBA program into letting me in based on life experience, taking the GMAT and a little bit of college. And so it was kind of a lifeline. At the time I was in the depths of this struggling business. I had gained this appreciation for the numbers. I was really getting to know, and I'd met, started mastermind groups, joining mastermind groups, and met other entrepreneurs, and realized it felt like everyone was running a fairly unsophisticated playbook. And for me in my life, I had really big goals and dreams. And what I wanted to do was to kind of break out of that like traditional micro to small business mindset and go learn how the pros did it. And this was kind of my idea was, okay, if I can learn how big businesses succeed, because believe it or not, we always forget no Fortune 500 company started out as a Fortune 500 company. Like every company, you can go back to the really, really humble origin stories. And so I kind of wanted to understand, not that I thought I was going to build my business into a Fortune 500, but like, what do they know that we don't know? And if I can learn it, can I distill it and figure out how it applies in a small setting? And so that was my mindset when I started business school.
And do you find too that, like, I love that you brought this up, because I think sometimes um business owners and entrepreneurs get this candy-eyed view, right, of going, I want to have a Fortune 500 company, as your example, like this, that is the ultimate dream. And then you go, have you talked to anybody who runs one of these to see what's actually involved in it? I know myself made that mistake, right? Built a business and I was
Yep.
like, this is what you're supposed to do. And then I went too big, too big, too fast, too fast. Like,
Yeah.
but you can't back out, because now you're kind of sort of stuck. But it was kind of one of those realizations where I was like, I really got to stop and actually have conversations with people who are at that point and go, would you do it again? Because I was
Yeah.
very surprised when I talked to a lot of people that they were like, nope. Um, I wouldn't do this again, because there was something, that it was a post on LinkedIn, and I can't remember the company name now, but it's a very large company. And he was like, I wouldn't do it again because I didn't realize the amount of stress and strain it was going to put. Like, I lost a marriage, I lost a lot of stuff to make this company big. So sure, right now it looks beautiful. It looks
Yeah.
great. My bank account looks nice, but there was a lot of deaths along the way that had to happen to get there. I don't know if I would sacrifice that again.
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think that's where, I'm a huge proponent of mastermind groups, and just whether you call it a mastermind group, whether you join one of the big brand name ones that charge a lot of money or not, or just find a handful of friends. And nowadays with Zoom and just the ability to meet online, it's so different in terms of, the ability to find that, because you're absolutely right. We can all do the grass is greener game, right? And that's one thing. Like, I have a love-hate relationship with Shark Tank, right? There's a lot of examples of entrepreneurship, and it was Inc. magazine got into this for a long time, where it's like, hey, grow this company, hyper growth, sell a big chunk of your equity to somebody who's gonna push you even further, pedal to the metal. That's not what the reality of most small businesses are. And to your point, you can find yourself, quote, successful from the outside looking in and really unhappy. And that's why, actually I said we have a 3-step process, but the first step is asking people what their goals are. Like, really, what are your goals? Because, 99.9%, let's say all businesses I've ever talked to, the owner has one of 4 goals. They either want to grow the business, which again, I love to ask that question. Okay, great. Why? Right?
Mhm.
They either want to grow it, they want to be more profitable, they want to improve their cash flow, or they want to exit the business. And a lot of times it's 2 out of 3, but 2 or 3 of those, but okay, in this order. And, the reality is it's a fool's errand to try and live life by somebody else's standards, right? It's a fool's errand to chase a dream that's not really your dream. And so once you're in the weeds and you're living that entrepreneur lifestyle, which is very hectic, very chaotic, very demanding, it's not uncommon that people realize, like, wait a minute, I've been going so far down this path. I don't love this. This isn't fun anymore. Like,
Yeah.
what am I doing? So,
Well, and
yeah.
I think, for yourself, because you've owned multiple businesses, did you find that like for me, the businesses that I owned I mean, I still have 3 businesses that run today. I spent a lot of my time trying to explain to people why I owned what I owned. And it took me a long time to go, I'm not explaining it to you because I don't care. you're,
Yeah.
and I started going, if you have $150,000, I will explain it to you because you can become a shareholder and then I can totally make it make sense. But if
Yeah.
you're not willing to do that, I'm not willing to, because it does, like you said, it didn't make sense to anybody else, but it made sense to me. And that's
Yep.
all that really mattered at the end of the
Yeah.
day. I could make it work and make it make sense.
Exactly. And to me, that's my number one favorite thing about entrepreneurship, right? Being in small business, whether somebody's doing a side hustle thing or they're building a big business or anywhere in between, the beauty of it is that you get to build it for you. And like, we've never, as entrepreneurs, as small business people, we've never been at a more kind of enlightened place in terms of being able to be proud of whatever your goal is. It may just be, hey, I want an extra $1,000 a month, or I'm building this business because I really want to work in this field that I haven't ever been able to spend time in, but now I'm going to go pursue a new kind of career angle there. There's a million different things you can do with it. And I think that's really the coolest part, which is why it's so heartbreaking when you see somebody going down a path and they look like they're holding on for dear life and they're hating it. It's like,
Yeah.
no, this is all wrong. Like, we got to
This
fix
isn't the
this
way it's
somehow.
supposed to be. Yeah.
Exactly.
And do you find for yourself, because, you've been doing this for, decades now, do you find that over the time, and I say this because this was a realization that I've had, is over the time, what your perception of success has changed? And
Oh,
how has that
absolutely.
been? Like,
Yeah.
which way did it go? Did it go bigger? Did it go?
I'm an ambitious person. So I definitely, when I was younger, I mean, it was like, you got to hang some giant number on the scoreboard kind of mindset. It was just a lot of the head trash around success. And frankly, like I said, part of it, if I'm just being, armchair psychologist here for myself, it was, I barely graduated high school because I kind of always joke that I majored in troublemaking in high school, and I was very successful at that, but not on the school part. And so it didn't put me on course to go to college in a normal way. That led to some kind of like late teens, early depression, or early 20s kind of depression, not in a major clinical way, but just really like, what on earth am I doing with my life? I felt like I was, living this out of body experience. Like, who am I right now?
Yeah.
And then that led me to see entrepreneurship as a path out of that, because I realized what I love about entrepreneurship, which is, at the end of the day, it really is merit based. I mean, if I can build a successful business, I can't fake my way to a successful business. Yes, there's a very rare exception where somebody gets lucky, but even the lucky people are actually pretty darn good,
Yeah.
right? And so for me, it was like, wait a minute, there's a path for me to catch back up in life and kind of compensate. So once I started having success, fall into the natural trap of like, I've got to go giant, I'm going to build this $1 billion company and all this kind of silly nonsense that you think when you're young and don't know. But once I started having children, once I, was married and started having children and started just realizing like, wait a minute, I want to spend my time doing things I'm passionate about. Like, that's my number one marker, and working with talented people. And I think the success comes with that. And I don't need gigantic numbers. I don't, you can live a really, really nice life. And one of the things I do with that is I travel. Like, every summer I'm gone for a month. I go with my family. I have to work remotely, so it's not like I'm completely disconnected, but that's our happy place, and I get to do that with my kids for a month every summer of their childhood. That to me is what I'm doing all this for.
Well, and I thank you for sharing that, because I think it's so important for people to hear. And like, I look back on like some notebooks and journals that I had of like these huge goals, and some of them I achieved, which was awesome because I was like, oh, 19-year-old me would be so proud. And some of the other ones that I look at that are now in my current journals of the goals that I want, I was like, if my 19-year-old read this, it would be like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Right? Because it's the same as you. I find that my now I'm like, I want to be able to take the summer off, not like 100% off, but we have a lake lot. So I like to go and
Yep.
sit at the lake lot. So I'm like, I don't want to deal with like client stuff, or, it's just going to be like my calls and my groups. And I get to like sit and relax and, and just do, and I'm like, the difference, the stark contrast, because before it was like, how many meetings could I cram in? My energy was definitely a lot more like, I loved working from the second I woke up to the second I went to sleep. Like it was everything. But like you said, then life happened. And then I started realizing there's other things I want to fill my time. Like I love what I do still, but I love what I do in shorter
Yeah.
increments of time.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I love that. And I kind of take that attitude. Like I work sometimes on the weekends, I think many people do, but I try to restrict it to things that I'm actually passionate about. So I'm learning something, I'm working on a project that I'm kind of jazzed to do. So it's a little bit of like, hey, I'm not going to subject myself to what I have to do during that period. And so, yeah, same kind of concept. And to your point, we started doing that. It was kind of a story of when Airbnb started to really blow up. My wife and I were planning, and we'd always gone for like a week during the summer. And I'm like, we're going to go for 2 weeks this year. And she's like, awesome. I went to book a place, and the town that we love to go to had restricted. They were tired of the Airbnb stuff. It was just starting to blow up 7 or 8 years ago. And they said, nope, monthly rentals only is a city ordinance. And all of a sudden it was like, well, we had just said like, we're going to commit big and do 2 weeks. Like, and I'm like,
How
now
do you
I've been
feel about
dreaming
a
about it.
month? Yeah.
And so exactly. So I said, I have no idea how the business is going to take this. I was still CEO of my first company in it every day. And I said, I have no idea how the business is going to accept this, but it's going to have to. And that was it. And so once we committed, that became a non-negotiable part of, the lifestyle. Like I always love to talk about entrepreneurial lifestyle, like focus way more on the life. It's not about style, right? It's about what is the quality of life you can get based on the sacrifice you have to take to be in this field.
I love that. I love that you said sacrifice, because I think that's what people forget, right? Like we had talked about, all of these companies, and people forget where they started and how hard that, I hear it all the time, like all of these companies started in a garage, and I'm like, are we just going to like glaze over that? Because I'm sure
Exactly.
it wasn't plush chairs and cushy times in those garages.
Exactly. Yeah, and
They're
the personal sacrifice, right? The people who run those companies, to your point, who can take them from a garage to something we've all heard of, is like it's such a personal sacrifice. Like I mean, I'm sure you've felt that way many times in your career. It's like I'm having to subordinate my feelings about this, what I want to do with my time, what I think I should be prioritized. Like I am just the last one to get to at certain times choose what I want. And so that puts a toll on a human, especially like I'm sure for you, and I know for me, it was over a decade in my turnaround of my first company. And it was, I mean, I always describe it as like it was a march through the desert, and I just had to believe I was going to make it to the other side. And
yeah.
there were times, like you said, people in my life were going like, what are you doing this for? Like, we see how upset you are. You're making way less money than you could if you went and got a job, like why? And so, but I always had this vision. And yeah, I don't like, to let anybody around me that I'm helping, keep in check is like, don't forget, because even when the times are good, the struggle's coming. There is no avoiding it or like getting beyond it. It just doesn't exist that way. The struggles come back bigger, like they come back bigger and meaner.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, for me, that is like, that's the enticement. I always say it's like being in an abusive relationship because you're like, you bring me to tears, you make me cry. Like there's moments where I just feel so frustrated, but then there's that little glimmer of something. And I'm like,
You
oh, yes, I remember the good times. Let's do this again. We can build this again. But it's that, I think that strive, it's that drive. I think that entrepreneurs that have been in it for a long time just have, where you're like, this is about more than just this brick and mortar building or just this website that you see. There's more behind the scenes. We were talking off air about, even this podcast, and there's been so much stuff that's happened in business that has started out of really weird things. Like if anybody would have
Yeah.
told me, hey, you're going to be doing a podcast, like even in my second, when I bought my second business, I would have been like, you're out to lunch. That would never cross my mind. And this started out of like a customer saying, you should talk for a living.
Oh, really?
It's how it
That's
started.
cool.
And then it was like just a hobby, and it was like just something to keep me busy. And then it merged into, this is something bigger, and then it just kept snowballing and then started creating itself into its sort of own business. So I always say, that you just never know where that journey is going to take you, and if you're open to it, sometimes it's amazing, where you're like, at the beginning none of this made sense, none of
Yeah.
this was lined up. And I find that a lot in business, like it's not this timeline that you're like, this is exactly how it's going to happen. It's always something weird, and you're like, people are like, how did you start? And I'm like, accounting. They're
Yeah.
like, that's not where you are. And I'm like, I know. Like
Yeah.
I think it's a weird journey for a lot of entrepreneurs that are decades in. They're like, nah, it's not going to make any sense. The map is really weird.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right. And that's an interesting observation. I mean, I feel like the same thing's true with challenges, right? I love what you said. Like when you look backward, even to you, sometimes it doesn't make sense, much less for somebody looking from the outside, doesn't really see every twist and turn. But, that's kind of part of what I learned in the last few years. It's changed my whole perspective, which is when the challenges come, like I don't yet understand how this is going to be a great thing that it happened to me, but it will.
Mhm.
And exactly like you're saying, through that entrepreneur story, like I'm going to turn this into, one of the best things that's ever happened to me. And I have no idea how I'm going to do that. But the minute I stop doing the like, woe is me, or, oh my gosh, this sucks. The minute I get out of that, which a little bit of self-loathing is fair. You get a little bit.
Yeah.
But the minute I get out of that, I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Now my thinking cap's on. I'm like, how am I going to solve this problem? How am I going to, build this into a great thing? And like you said, if you try to micromanage it, whether it's the interesting kind of weird intricacies that happen, or if I try to like, just strong arm your way through the challenges, it's going to make you miserable. Even when you occasionally succeed in those situations, it just takes such a huge toll on you. So there's, to me, a lot more value in learning to kind of enjoy the weird and wild road that we're all on and just go, I don't know. This doesn't make any sense to me either, but I'm going to enjoy it while we're going. Like, it's going to be fun.
Over the summer, we went to one of those, I think they're called like lazy rivers or whatever. And as we're
Yeah.
floating on it, of course, you're sitting in this like blow up tire,
Tube. Yeah.
essentially this
Yep.
tube,
Yep.
and you're just kind of floating around it. And I was sitting there, and my sister and I were just kind of looking at each other, and I'm like, this is literally the perfect metaphor for business. Because like sometimes you'd be turned around, you'd have no idea where you're going, and you're like, I just hope I'm going in the right direction. I have no idea. There's a bunch of people around you, and everybody thinks you've got it all figured out, and you're like, nope, I have no idea where I'm going. I don't even know if I'm doing the right thing, but you're smiling and laughing. And I'm like, it's so true that just feels like that is the journey, that sometimes you're just going backwards, and you're like, because I've had lots of people that are like, I don't know how you did it. Like you had some like really tough years there. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know how I survived. Like I literally just sometimes feel like I come out on the other end completely soaking wet going, what happened? It got really, really dark. I feel
No, I
like we
love
went
that.
through a cave or something, and whew,
Yeah.
okay, I'm still breathing, right?
Oh my gosh, I love that. And I guess kind of what I was just referring to, which is totally works in your metaphor analogy, is like when you're trying to get off the lazy river, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you'll see those people who are like, "Hey, let's get off right up here." One person's in the wrong side, somebody's turned around the wrong way. People are deciding whether or not they need
Yeah.
to try
You're
and
like,
bail
I'll
off the
meet you a
tube.
couple miles down. I can't get out.
Exactly. Yep. Even when you get to the side, I'm like holding on and the river's trying to keep dragging me. And so I'm having to like fight against the current. No, that's a really, really great way to put it. And, it's like, hey, just get a drink in your hand or, whatever, enjoy the ride, just have some
Yeah,
fun
just
and
keep
just,
floating and be like, okay, I guess
yeah,
this isn't my stop. Like it's time
exactly.
to stay on a little bit longer.
Yep.
Um, Looking back, like over your experiences and stuff, what is one thing that you were like, I need to tell people about this so that they don't have to, I need
Oh
to
my
tell
gosh.
people about this, this waterfall that's coming up, because I feel like it's happening and I don't want anybody else to fall down it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I have so many. It's hard to pick one. I would say that in my first business, so my first business was a turnaround. Like I said, we were really a train wreck. And so it was kind of like, I guess, for one thing, just as a quick aside, learn to appreciate when you learn from a bad example, right? I spent the first segment of my career going like, oh, why can't I just get a great mentor doing it the right way? They can help me see around corners, tell me all the things I should be doing. Like, why do I have to keep like digging through the wreckage, figuring out what happened here, and then trying to learn how to do it the right way myself? But that was a superpower because it ultimately gave me a tremendous depth of understanding of things that you don't get if somebody just says, hey, go left. Like, you just go left and it works, and you have no idea why you went left. You just went left. So the one thing I would say when we were starting to make a turnaround was I dug into every quote, every project, and obsessed over profitability at that level. And I think that's one area where a lot of business owners struggle is that, again, if I'm just getting the P&L every month, or somebody's just telling me what my profitability is, or I'm looking at whether or not I have money in the bank, I lose sight of the fact that those little wins turn into big wins, right? You got to win a bunch of little battles and you'll win a war. And it's like, I've got to win on every quote, on every order. I've got to know that I'm making profit. I've got to keep grinding out a bigger margin. I've got to figure out how to do this easier, faster, better. And then when I add fuel to that fire, it scales up really nicely. But a lot of people get so caught up, especially if they start growing, that they kind of lose track of like winning each day, each little battle. And then they look up and go like, we're not even profitable. Like, what am I doing all this for? Like, we've doubled in revenue and I'm miserable. I'm working like a crazy person and we're losing money. How's that even possible? We used to make money, and it's because they lost sight of that little touch. And so that I just kept a really tight rein on that. And I learned my business so much better by obsessing over those details in every little quote and every little order.
I love this because I think it's a hard pill for people to swallow. I think because you're like, you need to crawl through the mud, obstacle
Yeah.
course.
Yep.
But I think, truthfully, like you had said, I feel that's what set me up. Because now when I'm faced with something that would have torn me down, like completely put me on my butt or made me go, that's it, I quit, I'm out. Like now I'm like, this is funny. And I can find
Yeah.
the humor in it, right? Like I'm
Yep.
like to give a recent example, like I just recently published my first book and it was going out on Amazon and I'm in Canada and I'm like, it's not showing up properly. And it's like, who do you call? Right. And I remember sitting there and going, if this would have happened to me 15 years ago, I would have been flipping out. And now I'm like
Yes.
taking screenshots going, I'm a collectible. Cause it was like one collectible from $90. And I'm like, don't buy this. It's not, how am I collectible already? Like,
Yeah.
I'm just laughing about the process. But it's so funny because I do not think, had I have not gone through this in selling products before and coming across these issues that happen with shipping and delivery and all of this other stuff and having that background of going, everything will work out. This is the patience part of it.
Yep.
If I hadn't have learned that tougher lesson, this one would have been tough to learn as well, where now it was more of like, okay, how can we fix this ourselves? How can we use this to our advantage? The lesson became like the getting over the obstacle becomes a lot easier because you're like, okay, I have the foundations on how to build a ladder to get over this, not just going, oh God, again.
Yeah. Yeah.
This
No,
again.
you're right. You're absolutely right. I think that for me, that was a big part of the early stage of my career that really changed my perspective on life. And I don't, I've actually had business owner friends who had a really good 5-year run right at the beginning of their career. And when they hit their first big struggle, I mean, it overwhelmed them. They had no idea that like they just thought they wake up every day and it's the sun
It's
shining and the
perfect.
birds are
Yeah.
chirping and it's great. And they were in an amazing market. They had some really good mentors who kind of gave them some good heads up on the early stage. And so they were killing it. And then all of a sudden they're not. And they're like, they haven't learned that ability to overcome. And like you're saying, you get those little wins and you start learning how to turn little things over, and how can I turn this like total mess into a little beauty. And then all of a sudden I start building and I start getting in the confidence that comes with that. It's just staggering because like you're saying, what I'm hearing is, I knew this was a disaster, but I fixed a lot of disasters. Like
Yeah.
this isn't going to be the one that takes me down.
Yeah.
It's just not going to be. Like,
If
get
shipping
in
is going to be
line.
what takes me down, we've got bigger problems in this place. Like, yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
But I wouldn't
Yep.
have thought of it before, right? And I think it just gives you that ingenuity to kind of think of things
Yeah.
differently and come across things of going, okay, no, this isn't a big deal. Like, yeah, okay, we'll have our little pity party and be like, oh my God, what are we going to do? But the difference is now we're like, okay, come on, guys, let's think of some, let's get outside of ourselves. Let's think of some different stuff. How can we use this to, kind of our advantage? And it becomes something that is motivational as
Hmm.
opposed to, and it's not to say, like, let's be honest, it's not to say that there aren't those moments where you're like, I don't know, what am I going to do with this? Like, I don't know what to do with this. I mean, I still have that, and I still get people that are like, yeah, but 25 years in business. And I'm like, I still get, webinars or something like that I put on that nobody shows up to. Like, it's not, I
Exactly.
don't think this is something, it's just, it doesn't break my heart now. I'm like, oh, that didn't work. Let's see, why didn't it work? Whereas before it would have been like, why doesn't anybody love me? What's happening?
Yeah.
Right? It's not as soul crushing, I guess.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I mean, I think what you're describing is you're not defining yourself by one success or one failure,
Yeah.
right? And exactly to that point, I mean, I love that. I've come to say over time, like, hey, I'm obsessed with getting better. And so by definition, I don't want to be perfect. Like, I want to get better. And so, yeah, if I try something and it just bombs, I mean, first of all, I expect, and you probably too, the first time I try anything, it's going to be awful. Like,
Yeah.
it's not going to be any good. So I always say, like, hey, let's rip that Band-Aid off. Let's get that first one. Let's do it. Let's embrace the suck of that, figure out how we're going to be good. And from that, wreckage, we're going to put together something really nice. And ultimately I think I'll win, but yeah, it's not by no means. And to your point, even when you're experienced and you know what you're doing and you did everything right and everything, it's like, there's just days where you show up and you're like, what is this?
Yeah. What train
What?
wreck is this? I think when I first learned about beta testing, like when that terminology first came and someone's like, it was somebody who was doing like a workshop or whatever. They're like, hey, I'm beta testing this workshop. And I was like, what does that mean? And then she was like, well, we're just trying it out. So like, know that there will be kinks and there's, but that's why it was a lesser, like, I think it was like a third of what the cost was. And because you get in at the ground, right? And there was all these
Yep.
benefits. And when I went through the program, I was like, what the hell? This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. Cause you literally get to tell people this can be a shit show.
Yeah, exactly.
Come
And
on,
like, hey,
make it
buckle
better
up.
for us. I
Yeah,
was like, it was
exactly.
like an angel sung and came down and was like, oh, I was like, oh my God. And then of course, digging farther into it, I'm like, this is what like electronics company and like gaming, this is all what they've been doing. And I'm like, this is the most brilliant business idea I've ever heard in my life of like, hey,
Yep.
come and see our shit and let's shine it up together. Like,
Exactly.
tell me
Exactly.
what's
Yes.
wrong with this. I was like, oh my God, this is the best thing of life. And I
And
still use it to this day, right?
oh, 100%. And the amazing part too is, like you're saying, by being vulnerable with somebody who maybe your client or the person you would normally in that scenario be trying to impress and make them think everything's perfect, you're basically saying like, hey, everybody knows about a duck on water, like underneath. So just come on and check out what's going on
Yeah.
underneath this duck, and let's see, like, it's paddling like hell. Everybody's going crazy. We're trying to make this work. What an amazing way to get somebody on your side, right? I mean, the minute they
Yeah.
said that to you, you were rooting for them. You were trying to give them feedback, help them, even if it was just put on a big smile when something went disastrously wrong, right? And so,
Yeah.
like, what an amazing way to cultivate the right positivity around us by just saying, hey,
Yeah.
I kind of know what I'm doing, but we're going to find
We're
out.
going to try it. Well, and I think for me too, when I started doing it myself, I realized I became a little bit more fearless. Like I was like, it's now okay for me to try some stuff that I'm like, I don't know, this might be too out of the box for people. Like, but I was like, here's where we're going to try it. Like, here's where, and if it doesn't,
Yep.
we could just be like, okay, we took that out because we realized that's a bit much.
Yeah, no, that's really smart. I mean, I think to your point, like, it gives you the permission to try things maybe you otherwise wouldn't. And the really wild thing is, from my experience at least, you do this say 3 times and 2 of them are going to be garbage, but the
Yeah.
one might be the best thing you ever tried. And if you were held back and you were being really reserved and you're saying, hey, we only roll things out that we're confident in, we know work 100% of the time, then you're just going to be playing very conservatively. And ultimately, you're never going to have those innovations and breakthroughs.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, I mean, isn't that why we're all here? Is to have those brilliant ideas, those different ideas. How do how do you figure half of that stuff out if you're not like trying different things? So
Yep.
talk to us a little bit about, because I want to talk a little bit more on the company that you have right now. So exactly what is it?
Okay.
And
So we
who do
do,
you
yep.
help?
Okay. So we do what I like to call strategic accounting. So we are doing bookkeeping. And I call it strategic accounting because, again, I want to differentiate from what I was describing earlier, which is
Data entry
low
bookkeeping.
to, yeah, no value data entry bookkeeping, right? And so who we're helping, we're primarily working with digital firms. So we're a remote company based in the US. And so our team's remote. So we really want to work with more remote based companies. And so a lot of like digital marketing firms and groups like that. And so what we're doing that's a little bit different is, as I described, we have a 3-step process. So the first step, like I said, is figure out what the goal of the business owner is, like really have that heart to heart. And what part of what's got me so excited about this business is like I'm coming into it as an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur first. As I've gotten more and more kind of visionary in my career and gotten into multiple businesses and been that like board member type advisor role to the CEOs, I love nothing more than talking with other entrepreneurs, business owners, learning about their business, giving them ideas, telling them, hey, this idea may be terrible, but have you ever thought about this? Right. And so it's kind of from that place that I came into this concept of something I needed to do for my own businesses. Like I said, in the PPP experience, like here's a role that I'm looked to for even within my entrepreneur network. And then, really getting excited about how can we add value doing this bookkeeping. So we start with the goal, and it's, hey, entrepreneur to entrepreneur, like, what do you really want out of this? And most of them say, well, okay, what I really want is to ultimately exit my business, but I think to get there, I need to grow. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, now we're talking, right? So now, imagine your bookkeeper shows up with that in mind every day. That's a very different perspective than them just showing up saying, hey, did I get all the debits, all the credits? Is everything balanced? Is everything tied back?
Yeah. And I think somebody who has that experience behind them that understands all of the other stuff. I think for me, that's always been the key, right? Like,
Yep.
yes, I have all of the degrees and stuff behind me, but I also remember what it's like to hide in the closet with ice cream and cry. Like
Yeah.
when I say I understand, I really understand.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. No, I love that. And that's so what we do then, once I have the goal, we calculate what we call the fin score. Like I said, it's the 20 different criteria, and it's based across those 4 goals. So there's 5 levers of growth, 5 levers of profitability, 5 levers of cash flow, and 5 levers of what we call business maturity. Because so we can talk about it inside the company a little bit more freely than just saying, hey, where are you in relation to exit, right?
Right.
With that fin score in hand, we have a playbook, and I put it together. To be totally candid, these are not like all things I've come up with. We have over 450 plays, we call them, and the playbook is built on whether it's Greg Crabtree stuff, Keith Cunningham stuff. A lot of the really good small business financial minds that are out there publishing books, really great content. Even tips and tricks from Warren Buffett, and how does that apply to a small business? And so as we built that, it really comes down to, once I know your goal, once we've calculated where you stand, then the next step pretty much dictates itself. And so the beauty of that is, if we can streamline your bookkeeping and streamline the day-to-day accounting, I can free up time of someone who's in the weeds. So if we're talking about improving your AR collections, like an outsourced advisor is not going to fix your AR collections, because what is AR collections, right? It's really getting into like, why am I being paid slow? Is it certain clients? Is it certain types of job? Is it certain size of invoice? Figuring out what's actually happening, and then what are we going to do about it? And so that's the kind of in the weeds solution approach that we have, that I think is really different. And
Yeah.
so teaching our team and armed with that, alternative way to approach it, so they don't ever finish their work and say, well, now what could I do? It's like, okay, I've got to get through this, because the next thing I need to do to help move their fin score is this.
Right. So you guys essentially you guys are letting them know, okay, here's what the issue is, but we have a solution for that. We're going to help you, because a lot of times people will get that, right? Hey, your accounts receivable are slow. And they're like, well, I sent them an
Yeah.
email. Like what?
Yeah.
collections, like, I don't know what is the next natural step, right? As opposed to, having somebody who can sit there and go, here's how we're going to prevent this from happening in the
Yes.
future.
Yes. Yeah, and I think this part of business, a lot of times that small business owner is kind of operating off that hub and spoke model. Like, okay, I ask a person to help with this, it goes out to them, it comes right back to me as the hub and says, okay, here's what like AR is moving slowly. Okay, if I'm the business owner, it's like, well, wait a minute, I need to keep selling. I need to oversee the operations. I've got to manage my people because I need to do some, reviews. I need to do some hiring. I need to set my strategy for next year because it's that time of year I'm thinking about what's happening next year. And now you're telling me that, like, okay, I mean, how many more things can I possibly do? And
I'll
so
get
we
to
really
that in a
wanted
week.
exactly. I'll get to that when I run out of cash is
Yeah.
usually what it looks
Yeah.
like when I start freaking out about payroll. So we wanted to be like a done for you to the extent possible. We want to, advise you, give you transparency of what we're doing and where it's at, and then say like, hey, we're going to run this down. We're going to help collect for you. We're going to help do whatever needs to be done to keep moving that score. And each business has their own, pros and cons of the way they're set up and their model and their strengths. But that's the big thing for us is like, if we know what the next step is and we're engaged in the day to day to help solve that, then we just keep moving. Then the updates coming to you is like, hey, we noticed AR is slowing down. We did an analysis. We found out it's this one type of customer. We know that part of that industry is being hit right now. So we're going to be more proactive. We're going to notify your sales team about what open deals they have that are in that industry, et cetera. And so that's a very different approach from, the low value, like, hey, credit card balance again.
Here's your open invoice list.
Exactly. Yeah. Good luck.
Good luck with that.
Yep.
This is how much money you could have made this year. These people
Yep.
would have paid.
Exactly.
So for businesses, because I know that, this is obviously hitting exactly what our key demographic is of our listeners. What is one tip that you could give them that they could start doing today? Obviously, besides heading to your website to find out how you can help them, but what
Sure.
is one thing that you would say, this is something that you need to change and start doing in your business right away?
I would say you need to look very seriously at your pricing. So one thing that for non-finance people, non-math people, let's say that you're running a business, you're making 10% profit. If you doubled your prices, and I know businesses can't double your prices, so just
Yeah,
stick
they're
with me for
going, what?
the theoretical here. But what people don't realize, if you could somehow double your prices, it wouldn't double your profit. It would make your profit 11 times higher if you're making 10% right now. And so that paints the picture of the magnitude. If you raise your prices just 10% and you're making 10% and all of that additional revenue drops to the bottom line, you've literally doubled your profit by raising your prices 10%. So we need to obsess over pricing more than we do. And I think what happens, it's totally natural. A lot of people are really passionate about their product. Maybe they've got a little bit of background in sales, but it was a very structured sales environment. They're not pricing, experts. And so what do we all do? We say, well, let's be on the low end of normal for prices.
Yeah.
Let's be on the low end of, because then it's easier to sell. We're going to sell a lot. Well, here's the thing. You have to then turn around and service that work. And, the world's not getting any cheaper to live in, as we all know, nor is it getting any cheaper to hire people or do any of the other things we have to do as business owners. And so if you have a kind of a weak attitude toward pricing and you fall into that same trap, we've all been there. It is not a long-term strategy that is sustainable. And so it just feels like they're always losing a little bit of ground because their prices are too low. And then the irony is your prices are too low because you're trying to be a value. The problem is now you're compromising quality. You're not hiring as good of people. You're not able to do the above and beyond for your clients and add true value in the deliverable. And so now there's even more downward pressure, right, on the price. And so I would say the one thing, go back and look at your prices. Look at your competitors. Look at that one competitor who you think they've got really slick marketing and that's why their prices are high. Well, guess what? Yeah, you're going to have better marketing to justify your high price, but they have a path to make real money. And a lot of times we're just, kind of the Walking Dead. Like we're just this zombie
Too
where
scared
it's your
to,
job.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I remember I had a coach that was like, I was like, followed her for like the longest time. And then finally like took the plunge and decided to do coaching, one-on-one coaching with her. And I remember, she was like, okay, if you could ask me any question, what is it? Because I'm feeling like super generous right now. And I'm going to tell you the honest truth. I'm like, how do you know when to raise your price? Like, I'm so curious about this. This is when I was like, this is years back. And I was just getting into like kind of moving away from accounting and getting into more like consulting and stuff like that. And she goes, as soon as somebody buys it. And I was like, what? Like, I really was expecting this like formula, right? Because I'd just come out
Yeah.
of accounting. So I was expecting this. And she was like, once 3 people buy that product, I know I can raise the price. So I will put a little check mark beside it. 3 people bought it. Like, I know people are willing to spend that much money on it. So I know it can go
Yep.
higher. And I was
Exactly.
like, damn it. But still, you know, it was funny because it still sticks with me to this day. And I always kind of go, now I'm not as scared to raise my price because I'm not thinking like I was thinking market value and all of this other stuff. And I was trying to put all of these percentages because again, I was a numbers person. So I was trying to
Yep.
put all of these percentages and how it works and all of this other stuff. And I was like, this is just such a simple formula. Why aren't we just going because somebody bought it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like,
No, that's hilarious. That's great.
right. And
Love
it's
that.
like sometimes I find that, you know, when it comes to pricing, we put all of these like really harsh things on it, especially if you're somebody who, you know, it's a like a certain product or whatever. And you're
Mhm.
like, no, I can't because it won't, you know, I have a client who she does crafts. She makes homemade crafts and her business has gotten really big. But every time she goes to a trade show, it's like pulling teeth to get somebody to spend like $30 on a hat, right?
Yep.
But she sells these hats to large companies like Hermes and all like these big companies that buy it in bulk from her. And she puts this fancy little tag on it. And then they're selling it for like 300 or 400 bucks. And she was
Exactly.
like, it's so funny to me that sometimes I struggle. And she's like, but I was thinking marketing. When I was thinking of my pricing, I was putting myself in marketing mindset, not in designer outlet, where people were willing to pay that kind of money. She's like, it's exactly the same product made out of
Ex-
exactly the same stuff. So,
Yep.
you know, I think sometimes we have to get out of our own way and go, what market do we want to sell this in?
I love that. You're absolutely right. When you ask that question, it leads you to the right answers, right? You may
Yeah.
the first time you ask it, you're not necessarily going to get an answer, but at least you're asking the right questions, right? And to your point, where would this be a value at X price? Not, well, my existing customers never pay that. Now we're in this defeatist, we can't get any better kind of attitude. And the reality is there's someone who that provides tremendous value to. And like you're saying, the same exact product taken to one place is looked at, where it's just like this bargain bin kind of mentality. Well, yeah, right there, that's not
Yeah.
going to be the place
That's
they're going
not
to be
your,
happy to
yeah.
pay a premium.
That's not your
Yeah.
key target. I mean, we were standing in Costco the other day, my husband and I, my son. I hope his girlfriend doesn't listen to this. I might give away your Christmas present, but wants, you know, those big Costco bears that are like 7 feet tall? They're
Yeah.
like $250, but it's a gag. And he's like, Mom, I'm willing to save my money for this gift. It's important to me. So we're standing there. And of course, I'm waiting for him to come back and go, are you sure you really want to do this? And the amount of people that came by that were like, of course, they look at it and it's huge. It's over 7 feet. This thing is so heavy, are picking it up and going, oh my God, blah, blah, blah. This is so big. Like this would crush my kid. And you're getting all those kind of comments. One lady, one out of the like 20 people that passed us in the Costco was like, $250 is a ridiculous amount. Who the hell would ever spend that money? And she walked away. And I was thinking, years ago, I think I would go and try to convince that lady of why this was worth $250, but then completely ignore the fact that I'm standing beside this giant teddy bear waiting to put him in my cart. He didn't end up buying the bear, but it's still on the list. But I thought this is like so indicative of like how we think, right? Like we sometimes chase after that person who's like, they would never pay this, trying to convince them why they should pay this price, as opposed to just like turning the other way and going, there's a person going, yeah, it's $250.
Absolutely.
But my son going, but it's a joke. And I'm like, but it's
Yeah.
$250. And he's like, worth it. 100%
Yeah.
worth it. Like, okay, well,
Yeah. That's awesome. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that there's so many little nuggets you just had in there. One is have a big enough market where you can go find that person willing to pay the premium price, right?
Yeah.
And so you can't just paint yourself into such a tiny box, right? And that's one thing that's amazing about Costco, right? They've got this really weird $250 bear. It's enormous. You have to have a special car just to be able to fit it in there, right? Yeah. And yet if they just sold bears, like everybody would walk in and go like, this is a disaster. Why is there a 7-foot tall bear? This is terrifying. It's going to crush my kid.
And it comes out like once a year.
Exactly. And so, but they have generated enough traffic, enough people there for all kinds of reasons. The novelty factor, it's funny, gets everybody's attention. And all you need is occasionally somebody to come along and go, like your son, hey, it's worth $250 for this gag. Like,
this gag is hilarious. Worth it. I'll have to put a photo of it if he actually does it and it goes over well. I'll be like, see?
Yeah.
People really will spend that much money. So what call to action can we send people to that are like, I am loving everything that's Colin is saying. He's making me think differently of things, maybe even getting me excited about numbers.
Yeah. Yeah. So, obviously check out our website, which I think you'll probably put in the show notes.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so, go to our website. And one of the things, I'm going to be honest, I'm fairly new to marketing myself. We don't have a good name for this yet. But what I'm trying to do is sit down with as many business owners as I can and spend 45 minutes, like deep dive on their business. Let's look at one element of our Fin score. Let's figure it out for your business. And let me just give you as many good ideas as I possibly can in 45 minutes. It's not a sales call per se, where we're going to try and convince you to do something. But, that's, to me, connecting with entrepreneurs. And I believe, putting as much good out there as you can. There'll be plenty of karma, and we'll get deals and opportunities, even if it's elsewhere. But that's the biggest thing is, just don't be afraid to reach out and let's connect and let's do that.
I love that. I love that. Well, we'll make sure we have the link where people can find that and all of your other social media. Thank you so much for, spending time with me today. And for just opening up about a lot of things that I think that people are going to be like, damn it. Now I have to admit I might like numbers again.
Yeah. Hey, we all have those, right? I mean, you got to embrace the nerdery sometimes. So
I love that. Well, thank you for embracing the nerdery with us today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
As I said at the beginning of this episode, I know that a lot of eyes glaze over when you talk about numbers and finances. But like Colin was saying throughout this whole episode, it is something that can drastically change your business when you start paying more attention to what story is it that those numbers are trying to tell you. And then once you can figure out the story, how do you change that? How can you create a new narrative or a new story that you want to? And in all of the years of my career, which all 25 of them dealing in finance, this is one of the areas that I found has always been lacking. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to have Colin on the show, because it excites me so much that there are more people out there that are going, look, bookkeeping, 100% important. Knowing your numbers, having them entered properly is so integral to a business, but understanding what to do with those numbers. And this is what Colin's company is doing. Understand how to read those reports, how to go, hey, this isn't working, but having that person who has the entrepreneurial experience to go, okay, but here's how we're going to fix it. This is what we're going to do to take you to the next step. If you can find that in somebody who's helping you with your finances, the limits, the skies, the ceilings that you're going to be able to break through will be unimaginable. That is how important numbers are. And I know most people don't like them. I know I'm a weird, I'm like this weird unicorn who really loves numbers. But I think like Colin said, once you kind of dive into them, I promise you, they do get sexy after you stare at them for long enough. You will fall in love with them. You just have to have the right person showing you why. And Colin is one of those people. So I hope that you take a moment to do what Colin said and take a step back and go, okay, I'm going to look at this. This is what I'm going to do today. Make sure you check out the show notes, because we're going to have the links of where you can find him on social media, but also the link to where you can get your own discovery call, because that information that you're going to get on that phone call with Colin is going to be absolutely invaluable. I promise you, you're going to have so many ideas. You're not going to know what to do with them. So make sure you head there. Now, for a couple of my shameless plugs, just before we end this episode, you've got it. I hope you have it in your little hands. How to Collaborate, hot off the presses, is available. It's easier to get in the US than Canada, but don't worry, we are rectifying that. And you're going to be able to see on our website some new ways that you can get this in your hands definitely before Christmas. I'm so excited. How to Collaborate is finally out. This is for the small business who is really just trying to figure out another way. I take you through step by step how to discover collaborations, find one that's going to work for you, find the person you want to collaborate with, and how to create one from start to finish. It's like a step by step guide. It's all you need. And there's a lot of resources that go along with this book too that I've worked really hard on over the years. And I'm so excited to share it with. Also, there's some special promotions that are going to be coming up for Black Friday that it doesn't matter if you bought the book beforehand or you just buy it recently. If you have one of these in your hot little hands, you're going to be able to get some deals on our upcoming 2024 programs. It's only going to be available to those people that took the time to buy the book. So get your copy, make sure you read it. And, like Colin said, reach out to us because 100% me and my team are always there to help you come up with some ideas. It's the whole reason why I wrote this book. It's the whole reason why I love doing discovery calls. It's not about doing the sale like Colin said. It's literally about helping you start to get excited, get motivated, get those ideas churning, and start to fall in love with your business again. Remember why you started this in the first place. So you can find us, of course, wherever you normally find us. Reach out on social media, reach out through email, smoke signals. We try to answer them all here. And no matter what it is you're doing today, even if you're looking at numbers, make sure that you take time to have a little fun. Because as I always say, and always will say, if you're not having any fun, why are you doing it?